My name is Audrey Prescott. I am 33 years old, and I build luxury eco-resorts in the Colorado mountains. Last Thursday, I was sitting at a corner table in a Denver steakhouse when my father slid a printed invoice across the white linen tablecloth. It was not the dinner bill. It was a venue contract for my brother's wedding. The total at the bottom read $40,000. My mother took a sip of her Pinot Noir, adjusted her silk scarf, and looked at me like she was asking me to pass the salt. She said, "Your brother deserves the wedding he always dreamed of, Audrey, and you are the only one who can afford to give it to him." 30 years of being treated like a walking ATM packed into a single breath. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the invoice, traced the logo at the top, and said, "Is that what you expect me to do?" Less than 12 hours later, the venue manager called me in a panic, and my greedy brother realized he had just walked into a trap he could never escape. Welcome back to Morning Revenge, where quiet women face loud entitlement and the truth always collects its debts. Settle in. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to the steakhouse, because the audacity started long before the bill arrived. It was a Thursday night. We were at an upscale place downtown, the kind with heavy mahogany chairs and waiters who sweep crumbs off the table with little silver brushes. The air smelled of charred cedar and expensive bourbon. My parents had insisted on this dinner. They framed it as a celebration of Declan and Madison getting engaged. I knew better. A Prescott family dinner always came with an admission fee. Declan sat across from me. He is 29, works maybe 20 hours a week at a boutique ski shop in Boulder, and still brings his laundry to our mother on Sunday afternoons. He spent the first hour of dinner talking about his new startup idea. It was an app for renting luxury camping gear. He had no business plan, no code, just a logo he paid someone to draw on the internet. Next to him was Madison. She spent the evening holding her left hand up so the dining room lighting would catch her 2-carat diamond, a diamond my father undoubtedly financed. I sat there eating my salmon, letting the conversation wash over me. I grew up in the shadow of the Red Rocks. The culture out here is about building things that last, about earning your keep against the mountain stone. I spent my 20s working 80-hour weeks, securing land permits, managing construction crews, and building a portfolio of high-end eco-resorts. My hands have calluses. Declan has a manicured thumbnail he uses to peel labels off craft beer bottles. When the waiter cleared our plates, the atmosphere at the table shifted. My mother sat up straighter. My father cleared his throat and reached into his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a piece of heavy cream cardstock and pushed it toward my side of the table. I did not reach for it. I let it sit there next to my water glass. "We found the perfect location," my mother said. Her voice had that practiced, breathy quality she uses when she wants something. Madison has her heart set on a September date. The foliage will be just stunning. I looked down at the paper. It was a formal booking contract. The logo at the top was familiar, very familiar, the Alpine Crest Lodge. At the bottom of the page, a bold line indicated the required deposit to secure the date, $40,000. "Why is this sitting in front of my plate?" I asked. My voice was level. The ice in my water glass shifted with a soft clink. My father leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He looked at me with the casual expectation of a man ordering a second round of drinks. "We need the deposit cleared by tomorrow morning so they do not lose the slot," he said. "Madison's parents are covering the flowers and the band. We are handling the rehearsal dinner. We need you to handle the venue." "You mean you need me to pay for it?" I said. Declan finally stopped stirring his coffee. He looked at me, his expression caught somewhere between a pout and a demand. "It is a loan, Aud. I will pay you back as soon as the app gets funded. We just need the cash now." I stared at him. A 29-year-old man asking his sister to drop the equivalent of a down payment on a luxury mountain venue because he could not be bothered to save a dime. I turned my gaze back to my father. Why is his wedding my financial responsibility? My father did not flinch. He just looked at me cold and practical. "Because you are the one who can afford it." The words landed on the table like lead. There was no request. There was no gratitude. There was only the fundamental law of my family ecosystem. Declan existed to take, and I existed to provide. They viewed my success not as an achievement to be proud of, but as a resource pool they felt entitled to drain. My mother reached across the table and patted my wrist. Her rings felt cold against my skin. Family takes care of family, Audrey. Do not make this difficult. Let him have his dream. I looked at the invoice again. The Alpine Crest Lodge. It sits on a pristine ridge overlooking the Continental Divide. It boasts a reclaimed timbered dining hall, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and a waiting list 18 months long. It is the premier wedding destination in the state. They had spent weeks touring venues. They had tasted the catering, walked the grounds, and fallen in love with the aesthetic. But in all their superficial planning, they had failed to do one basic piece of research. They never looked up the parent company that owned the lodge. They never checked the corporate registry. If they had, they would have seen my name listed as the primary shareholder and CEO. They wanted me to pay for a venue I already owned. A different kind of person might have yelled. They might have stood up, caused a scene, and told their family exactly how pathetic they were. But I learned a long time ago that loud anger just gives people like my parents a reason to call you crazy. Loud anger lets them play the victim. Quiet action traps them. I reached into my purse. I pulled out my heavy metal corporate card and placed it directly on top of the invoice. The dark metal contrasted sharply with the cream paper. "Consider it handled," I said. My mother exhaled a long sigh of relief. A triumphant smile spread across Declan's face. He leaned back in his chair and wrapped an arm around Madison. "I knew you would come through," he said. "You always do." I signaled the waiter. When he arrived, I handed him a different card to pay for the dinner we had just eaten. I did not say another word. I waited for the receipt, signed it, gathered my coat, and stood up. "You are leaving?" my father asked. His tone suggested I was being rude for departing early after just securing his son a small fortune. "I have early meetings," I said. "I will process the venue payment tonight." I walked out of the restaurant into the sharp Colorado night. The cold air hit my face clean and waking me up fully. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, listening to the engine idle. I was not angry. Anger requires a sense of betrayal, and I had stopped expecting loyalty from them years ago. What I felt was a cold, crystalline clarity. I drove back to my house in the foothills. The jagged outline of the mountains stood dark against the night sky, ancient and immovable. When I got inside, I did not pour a drink. I did not call a friend to vent. I walked straight into my home office, booted up my laptop, and logged into my secure corporate portal. I pulled up the pending reservation for Declan Prescott. I verified the dates, I verified the invoice amount. Then I transferred $40,000 directly from my corporate operating account to the venue's holding account. I paid the bill in full. I did not do it out of love. I did it because it was the price of admission to the lesson they were about to learn. I downloaded the official receipt, attached it to a sterile email, and sent it to Declan with 3 words: "It is handled." I closed the laptop and turned off the light. I knew my brother. I knew the depth of his laziness and the height of his greed. I knew that handing him a $40,000 reservation was like handing a thief a master key and expecting him not to turn the lock. All I had to do was wait for morning. The morning light hit the jagged sandstone of the Red Rocks long before it reached the valley floor. I stood by the glass doors of my kitchen, holding a mug of black coffee. The air outside was sharp and thin. Living near the foothills gives you a certain perspective on time. Those rock formations took millions of years of wind and tectonic pressure to build. They endured. They stood firm against the elements. I liked looking at them. They reminded me of the kind of life I wanted to build, a life rooted in deep foundations, earned through grit and weathering storms. That is the Colorado way. You respect the mountain, you do your own heavy lifting, and you do not expect anyone to carry your pack. My family operates on a different frequency. For my parents, success is not a structure you build. It is a costume you wear to country club dinners. It is about appearances, zip codes, and making sure the neighbors know your son is destined for greatness, even if that son is nearing 30 and still needs help paying his cell phone bill. That is why they never knew the true scale of my company. When I started Alpine Eco Resorts 7 years ago, I drew a hard line. I kept my corporate life fenced off from my personal life. I never brought my parents to my ribbon-cutting ceremonies. I never shared my quarterly earnings at Thanksgiving. If they knew the extent of my portfolio, they would not see a daughter who worked herself to the bone. They would see an endless line of credit. The Alpine Crest Lodge was my crown jewel. I purchased the property when it was just a derelict ski lodge, sitting on 200 acres of pristine timberland. I spent 3 years dealing with zoning boards, environmental impact studies, and construction delays to transform it into the flagship property of my portfolio. We repurposed the original timber-installed solar arrays and created a destination that booked out 2 years in advance. It was my sanctuary. And now, by some twist of lazy fate, it was the exact venue my brother and his fiancée had chosen for their luxury wedding. They had walked through my reclaimed wood lobby, tasted the menu prepared by my executive chef, and signed a preliminary contract with my booking department, all without ever realizing the name on the property deed was mine. I kept my ownership hidden behind a corporate limited liability company. It was a layer of armor I wore to protect my peace. I walked over to my kitchen island and opened my laptop to check the ledger. The transaction from the previous night sat at the top of the screen. $40,000 debited from my corporate operating account and credited to the venue holding account. A clean internal transfer. Most people would look at that number and see a shakedown. They would see a daughter caving to the toxic demands of her parents. But looking at the screen, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I viewed that money as a severance package. For years, my parents had levied a tax on my success. It started small, paying for a family vacation here, covering a sudden car repair for Declan there. But the demands always escalated. The guilt trips became more refined. They would tell me that my brother was just finding his footing, and since I had so much, I was being selfish for not sharing. I paid the venue invoice because I wanted to buy the end of that sentence. I wanted to close the chapter permanently. $40,000 was a steep price for freedom, but in the business world, you learn to identify sunk costs. My family was a sunk cost. By paying for the venue in full, I erased their last remaining point of leverage. They could never again claim I did not support my brother. I had purchased his dream wedding. The ledger was balanced, and I was officially walking away. I took another sip of my coffee and thought about Declan reading the email I sent him. I had only typed 3 words. It is handled. Those 3 words were a final transaction. I pictured him sitting in his apartment playing video games, reveling in the fact that he had scored a luxury venue without lifting a finger. He lacked the rugged individualism that defined everything I respected. He wanted the view from the summit, but he wanted someone else to carry him up the trail. Handing a person like that a paid invoice for a premier resort is a dangerous game. People who never have to work for their resources rarely respect the value of them. They see a paid balance not as a gift, but as an opportunity to extract even more. I knew Declan operated in a state of perpetual opportunism. His so-called startups were always just schemes to bypass actual labor. The luxury camping application, the boutique marketing firm, the organic energy drink brand. Every single one was a hollow shell designed to attract investors who would fund his lifestyle while he did none of the operational work. My parents called him a visionary. I called him a grifter, and a grifter holding a $40,000 reservation is a person holding a loaded weapon. He just did not know the safety was still on. I stepped out onto my back deck. The morning frost still clung to the pine needles. The quiet out here is different from city quiet. It is heavy. It settles into your bones. I needed that silence to clear my head. The boundary between familial duty and business reality had always been a tightrope. Society tells you that family is paramount, that blood obligates you to sacrifice your own stability for their comfort. But business teaches you to identify toxic assets. When a division of a company bleeds capital and produces no return, you cut it loose. You do not pour more funds into a failing venture just because you have a long history with it. My parents expected me to run my personal life on emotion and my business life on logic. They never understood that I applied the exact same metrics to both. I went back inside and prepared for my workday. I had architectural blueprints to review for a new site in Aspen. I had quarterly tax projections to finalize. I put my personal phone on silent and tossed it into a desk drawer. I did not want to hear from my mother praising my generosity. I did not want a hollow text from Madison thanking me for saving her big day. I wanted the transaction to remain cold and distant. I had built a fortress around my life, and paying that invoice was the final brick in the wall. The matter was settled. I had done my part. The wedding was funded, the venue was secured, and my hands were clean. I sat down at my desk, unrolled a set of large blueprints, and smoothed the edges flat with my palms. The paper felt solid, real, something I could measure and build. I let the rhythm of my work take over, analyzing the load-bearing walls and the foundation plans. I expected a quiet, productive Thursday. I expected the family drama to be muted for at least a few months. I believed the $40,000 severance package had bought me a season of peace. I was wrong. The problem with a person who has spent his entire life taking shortcuts is that he cannot recognize a dead end until he crashes into it. Declan never wanted the wedding. He wanted the optics of the wedding, and more importantly, he wanted the capital associated with it. I assumed I was buying my exit. I did not realize I had just laid the perfect bait for a trap my brother would spring on himself. The quiet morning stretched on, peaceful and crisp, hiding the impending betrayal that was currently unfolding 30 miles away at the front desk of my own resort. I reached for my red pen to mark a revision on the blueprints, entirely unaware that the most revealing phone call of my life was only minutes away. I spent the next 2 hours entirely absorbed in the floor plans for the Aspen project. My home office is built for absolute focus. The walls feature sound-absorbing cedar panels. The drafting table is a heavy block of reclaimed mahogany. I enjoy the scent of graphite and cold brew coffee. It grounds my senses. The sharp morning sunlight cut across the room, illuminating dust motes dancing above the drafting paper. I held a metal architectural scale ruler calculating the square footage of a proposed wellness center. The rhythm of the work served as a meditation. It provided a stark contrast to the emotional noise my relatives constantly generated. Then the quiet broke. The phone on my desk began to vibrate against the wood. It was not my personal device. It was my dedicated corporate line. I glanced at the screen. The caller identification displayed the name Valerie Vance. Valerie serves as the general manager of the Alpine Crest Lodge. I hired her 4 years ago because she possesses a rare combination of hospitality grace and ruthless operational efficiency. She navigates screaming brides, blizzard supply chain failures, and demanding local politicians without ever raising her pulse. She knows exactly who I am and guards my ownership status with fierce discretion. We usually touch base on Friday afternoons for a weekly revenue breakdown. Calling me on a Thursday morning meant a crisis had bypassed the standard operational hierarchy. I set the metal ruler down. It made a sharp clack against the mahogany surface. I pressed the green icon and answered the call. "Good morning, Valerie," I said. Her breathing sounded shallow over the speaker. She did not open with her usual bright greeting. "Audrey," she began. Her voice lacked its standard polish. "We have a problem." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I asked her if a pipe had burst in the main dining hall. I asked if we had a staffing strike before the weekend rush. I would have preferred either of those scenarios. "No," she said. "It is not the facility. It is a guest. Specifically the guest whose booking you personally finalized late last night, Declan Prescott." The name hung in the thin mountain air. I kept my breathing steady. "What did he do?" I asked. Valerie let out a heavy sigh. She explained that the reservations desk opened at 8 o'clock. At exactly 8:15, your brother called the main line. He demanded to speak directly to the general manager. When I took the call, he sounded frantic. He claimed there had been a catastrophic family emergency overnight. He said the wedding was canceled, and he needed to revoke the entire reservation immediately. I felt a cold tightness form in my chest. A family emergency. My parents were perfectly fine when I left them at the Denver Steakhouse. Declan was lying. But the cancellation was not the actual issue. Valerie continued speaking, her tone shifting from uncomfortable to deeply professional. "I processed the cancellation per his request," she said. "I informed him that because the booking was secured less than 12 hours ago, a full refund would automatically route back to the original method of payment." That is when his demeanor changed. He stopped acting panicked and became incredibly belligerent. He explicitly ordered me to bypass the original payment card. He said the card belonged to a third-party vendor they no longer worked with. He demanded that the $40,000 refund be wired directly into his personal checking account. He even had his routing numbers ready to dictate over the phone. The silence on my end stretched for a long time. I looked at the architectural blueprints on my desk, the precise lines and exact measurements. Then I looked at the reality of my brother. The contrast was sickening. He did not want a luxury mountain wedding. He never intended to walk down the aisle at my resort. He viewed my $40,000 payment as a liquid asset he could steal. He used the facade of his engagement to trick me into depositing a massive sum into a corporate holding account, fully intending to cancel the event and pocket the cash. He was willing to ruin Madison's dream day just to fund his own pathetic existence. This was no longer lazy entitlement. This was calculated fraud. My own flesh and blood had orchestrated a financial scam against me. I pressed my fingertips against my temples. The sheer audacity of his plan was staggering. He thought he was outsmarting a faceless hospitality corporation. He assumed some entry-level desk clerk would simply hit a button and transfer a small fortune into his bank account without asking questions. He had no idea he was attempting to defraud a company owned by the exact same sister he had just manipulated at dinner. He walked into a bank to rob the vault, fully unaware that I was the one watching him through the security cameras. My parents had spent 29 years enabling his bad behavior. They covered his overdraft fees, paid his rent, and bought him expensive toys to keep him quiet. They created a monster who believed consequences applied to everyone else. Now that monster was trying to bite the only hand that ever tried to build something real. Valerie waited patiently on the line. She knew the gravity of the situation. She knew Declan was my sibling, but she also knew my strict adherence to corporate protocol. "Audrey," she said softly, "you know our anti-money laundering protocols. We cannot legally divert a refund to a secondary account." I flagged his request as highly suspicious the moment he asked. I told him I had to escalate the wire transfer to corporate accounting for approval. He is currently on hold. He thinks I am getting authorization to send him the cash. The cold tightness in my chest vanished, replaced by a profound, icy calm. Anger is a messy emotion. It makes you sloppy. It makes you yell and scream and show your hand before the river card is dealt. I did not want to yell at Declan. I wanted to watch him dismantle his own life using the very tools he tried to use against me. "Valerie," I said. My voice was completely flat. "You did exactly the right thing. Do not let him know that I am involved. Keep the corporate veil intact." I instructed her to hold the line while I pulled up the financial software on my secondary monitor. I watched the cursor blink against the white background of the banking portal. The game had officially changed. My brother wanted to play high-stakes financial fraud. It was time to show him what happens when you sit at a table with someone who owns the casino. I navigated to the payment gateway. The $40,000 deposit sat there suspended in digital transit. I asked Valerie how long Declan had been waiting on hold. 7 minutes, she replied. He is probably pacing a hole in his living room floor. I smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. I imagined him staring at his phone, already spending the stolen money in his head. He probably thought he was the smartest guy in Colorado right now. "Let him wait another minute," I said. "I am going to initiate the tactical response from my end. I need you to deliver a very specific message when you take him off hold." The pieces were moving into place. Declan had handed me the shovel, and I was going to let him dig his own grave as deep as he wanted. I stared at the financial software on my secondary monitor. The pending transaction sat there, a digital representation of my brother's greed. Valerie remained quiet on the other end of the line, waiting for my directive. She understood the delicate nature of family politics, but she also knew my primary allegiance belonged to the integrity of the business. "Take him off hold," I said. My voice echoed slightly in the soundproof office. "Inform Mr. Prescott that his cancellation request is approved. Tell him the venue is officially released back into the booking pool. But regarding the funds, you must cite our anti-fraud compliance regulations. Explain that corporate policy strictly prohibits diverting a refund to any account other than the originating payment source. Let him know the $40,000 is already being routed back to the corporate card on file." I heard Valerie take a steadying breath. "Understood," she replied. "I am switching back to his line now. I will call you the moment the interaction concludes." The line disconnected with a soft click. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany drafting table. I did not pace the room. I did not bite my nails. I simply watched the banking portal on my screen. The interface was a sterile gray and blue, designed for institutional efficiency. In my line of work, you learn to trust systems over sentiments. Sentiments can be manipulated by a crying mother or a demanding father. Systems only respond to authorized credentials. Less than 3 minutes later, a notification banner descended across the top right corner of my monitor. The merchant gateway had initiated a reversal. I refreshed the browser. A line of green text appeared at the top of the ledger. A pending credit of $40,000 had successfully arrived in my operating account. The money was safe. My capital was secure. The phone vibrated again. I answered it before the second ring. "It is done," Valerie said. Her tone was brisk, stripped of any lingering hesitation. I delivered the message exactly as you instructed. "How did he react?" I asked. There was a heavy pause. He did not handle it well, Audrey. The moment I told him the cash wire was denied, his tone shifted. He demanded the name of my regional director. He threatened to leave scathing reviews on every bridal website on the internet. He claimed he was a high net worth client and that we were stealing his money. I held firm. I told him the transaction was automated and irreversible. Once he realized I was not going to budge, he hung up. He hung up because he realized he had lost his leverage, I said. "Thank you, Valerie. You handled this flawlessly." "I need you to execute one final step," I continued. "Draft a formal cancellation confirmation. Send it to the email address he provided on the booking form. I want the language to be immaculate. State clearly that per his explicit instructions, the event date has been released. In the billing section, explicitly note that the refund was processed and returned to the original payer." I paused, ensuring she grasped the next crucial detail. "But do not use my name. List the original payer as Alpine Eco Resorts Holdings LLC. Keep my personal identity entirely shielded behind the corporate entity. He knows he asked for the money, but he cannot know he was trying to steal it directly from my company." "I will send the email right now," Valerie confirmed. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. The psychological chess match had officially entered its middle game. Declan had sought a shortcut. He wanted the prestige of a luxury mountain wedding, without the burden of paying for it, and then he decided to exploit that gift for liquid cash. Instead, his own greed had trapped him. By trying to rob the venue, he had successfully canceled his own wedding, forfeited his date, and secured absolutely $0 for his trouble. He was currently standing in the center of a crater he had dug with his own hands. I pushed my chair back and stood up. My office felt too small for the energy buzzing in my veins. I walked down the hallway to my kitchen. The morning sun streamed through the expansive windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I approached my espresso machine, a heavy stainless steel appliance that required focus and precision to operate. I ground the dark roast beans, the mechanical whir filling the quiet house. I tamped the grounds into the portafilter, applying exact pressure, and locked it into place. As the dark liquid extracted into a ceramic cup, I looked out the window. The rugged pines of the Colorado foothills swayed slightly in the morning breeze. They were resilient trees, evolved to survive harsh winters and rocky soil. They did not thrive by expecting the environment to yield to them. They thrived by growing deep roots. My brother was a parasite, clinging to the branches of our family tree, draining the sap because he refused to dig his own roots. My parents enabled that parasitic nature. They provided the endless supply of nutrients, shielding him from the harsh climate of reality. They demanded I act as a secondary root system, funneling my hard-earned resources upward to keep his illusion alive. But a corporate shield is a beautiful invention. It lacks emotion. It cannot be guilt-tripped over a holiday dinner. It does not care about family loyalty or the tears of a disappointed mother. An LLC operates on contracts, compliance, and strict liability. By inserting my holding company between myself and my brother, I had erected an impenetrable wall. Declan was not fighting his sister anymore. He was fighting a legal entity that simply said no. I took a sip of the espresso. The bitter, complex flavor coated my tongue. A cold, crystalline clarity settled over my mind. This is the essence of quiet justice. When someone attempts to manipulate you, the instinct is often to confront them loudly, to demand an apology, to seek validation for your outrage. But loud confrontations only provide the manipulator with ammunition. It gives them a stage to perform their victimhood. I did not need to call Declan. I did not need to scold him or demand an explanation for his treachery. Silence is far more terrifying to a liar than a screaming match. Right now, Declan was sitting in his apartment staring at his phone. He was processing the reality of his failure. The venue was gone, The $40,000 was out of his reach. He had to face his fiancée and explain why their dream location was no longer booked. But a man like Declan does not accept defeat easily. He lacks the self-awareness to realize he defeated himself. He would inevitably try to spin a new narrative. He would construct a fictional scenario where he was the victim of a ruthless corporation. He would need a savior to fix his manufactured crisis. He would need someone with deep pockets to step in and secure a new venue, or better yet, hand him the cash directly to repair the damage. I walked back to my home office carrying my ceramic cup. I sat down at the mahogany drafting table and looked at the muted smartphone resting near my blueprints. The screen remained dark. The trap was fully armed and concealed beneath the brush. I took another slow sip of espresso, my eyes fixed on the device. Declan would panic. He would craft a frantic, desperate lie. And when he was ready to sell that lie, I knew exactly whose number he would dial first. The morning sun climbed higher above the mountain ridge, baking the frost off the pine needles outside my window. 2 hours had passed since my conversation with Valerie. I sat at my drafting table, reviewing environmental compliance reports for a proposed geothermal heating system. My focus remained unbroken, my breathing even. I turned the pages of the technical document, digesting the data, while a secondary part of my brain kept a silent watch on the digital clock resting in the corner of my monitor. 11:14. My personal smartphone illuminated. The device buzzed against the solid wood surface. Declan Prescott. I did not answer immediately. I watched the screen glow, allowing the rhythmic vibration to fill the quiet room. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. He hung up. 10 seconds later, the display lit up again. The urgency in his redial was palpable. He was a man standing on a crumbling ledge, realizing the safety net he intended to steal had vanished. I reached out, swiped the green icon, and held the speaker to my ear.
Audrey, thank God. Pick up, please pick up.
His voice was breathless, frantic, a masterclass in fabricated distress. If I did not know the truth, I might have believed his lungs were genuinely failing him.
I am here, I stated softly.
It is a disaster, he gasped. The venue, the lodge, they screwed everything up. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I noted his specific choice of phrasing. They screwed up. He was already building a narrative where he was the innocent victim of corporate incompetence. He sought to distance himself from the wreckage he had personally engineered. Breathe, I said, offering a lifeline I knew he would misuse. Tell me what occurred. I called them this morning to confirm the catering tasting he fabricated effortlessly. The receptionist could not find our file. She transferred me to some manager and they told me our booking was canceled. They said there was a clerical error in their system. A computer glitch wiped out the September calendar. I listened to the lie pour through the receiver. It was a spectacular piece of fiction. He delivered the lines with the practiced urgency of a man who had spent his entire life avoiding accountability. When we were children, Declan crashed my father's vintage motorcycle into a neighbor's retaining wall. Instead of admitting he stole the keys, he claimed a stray dog chased him into the street, forcing him to swerve. My parents bought the neighbor a new wall and bought Declan a newer, safer vehicle. He learned early that a loud enough tragedy eclipses the truth. A computer glitch, I repeated. My tone betrayed nothing. It was a smooth, reflective surface. Yes, he insisted, his pitch rising to convey desperation. They deleted the reservation. Madison is in the other room hyperventilating. She is in tears, Audrey. Her dream day is gone because some idiot at a front desk clicked the wrong button. I pictured Madison, a convenient prop in his theater of tragedy. I wondered if she was even in the apartment with him, or if she was out shopping for floral arrangements, entirely oblivious to the fact that her future husband was currently torching their nuptials for a quick payday. Did they offer a solution, I inquired. This was the pivot. This was the moment the grifter asked the mark to open her wallet. They are refusing to reinstate the date unless we provide an immediate cash deposit, he explained, his words rushing together in a torrent of manufactured panic. They said the original payment is locked in some digital void and could take months to refund, but the manager promised to hold our weekend if I wire funds directly by noon. They will not accept another corporate card. They need a direct wire transfer. I looked at my computer monitor. The $40,000 credit sat glowing brightly in my operating ledger. A digital void. They want a direct wire, I clarified. Yes, he pushed, sensing a potential victory. But I do not have that kind of liquidity. You know my startup is in the seed phase. Audrey, I need you to send the 40 grand to my personal checking account right now. I will walk down to the bank and wire it to the venue myself. I have to handle this personally to ensure they do not mess it up again. There it was. The ultimate objective naked and exposed. He wanted the capital in his own hands. He wanted to intercept the funds, bypass the resort, and pocket the cash. I closed my eyes. He genuinely believed I was foolish enough to fall for a story full of administrative holes. He thought wealth made me naive. He assumed my success was a byproduct of luck, not sharp observation. Is that what they told you I asked? The question hung in the digital space connecting us. It was a mirror held up to his deception, designed to see if he would flinch. Declan doubled down, misinterpreting my calm demeanor for gullibility. Yes, they were incredibly rude about it too. The woman on the phone practically laughed at me. Madison is devastated. We cannot lose this location. Mom and Dad already mailed the save the date drafts to the printer. You have to wire me the cash, Odd. You cannot let my wedding fall apart over a billing mistake. He invoked our parents. He invoked the crying bride. He hit every note on the emotional keyboard, hoping one of those chords would trigger my sympathy and open my accounts. I understand the severity of the situation, I replied. My voice remained steady, a placid lake hiding a perilous undertow. So you will send it? He asked eagerly. I could hear the anticipation elevating his heart rate. He thought he had crossed the finish line. I will look into it, I said. Wait, what does that mean? His panic spiked this time. Authentic and sharp. There is nothing to look into. They need the wire by noon. You cannot just look into it. You have to send the funds. I will investigate the matter and get back to you, I stated, slicing through his frantic demands with surgical precision. Goodbye, Declan. I pressed the red circle on the screen, terminating the connection. I set the phone on the desk. The silence in my office rushed back in, thick and satisfying. He was currently staring at his screen, realizing his foolproof extraction plan had hit an unexpected barrier. The seed of doubt was planted, and his fabricated crisis was slowly turning into a genuine nightmare. I stood up and walked to the window. The rugged peaks of the Rockies loomed in the distance. You cannot construct a load-bearing wall on a foundation of lies. If the soil is unstable, the structure eventually collapses. Declan was standing on a sinkhole he had dug himself. He expected me to throw him a rope. Instead, I was going to hand him a shovel and watch him keep digging. He would not stop here. A liar deprived of his prize always escalates. He would scramble to assemble proof. He would attempt to manufacture evidence to corroborate his story. He needed to convince me that his emergency was real, which meant he was about to commit his deception to paper. I took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and now all I needed was for my brother to put his fraud in writing. I picked up my phone again. The glass screen was cool against my fingertips. Declan was undoubtedly pacing his living room, scrambling to figure out his next move. A predator does not chase prey that is standing still. I needed him to step out into the open. I opened the group message thread that included Declan, my mother, and my father. The last message in the thread was a photograph of a tiered wedding cake my mother had sent 3 days ago. I tapped the keyboard, crafting a response designed to lower his defenses. Declan called me regarding a billing issue with the venue, I typed. I am trying to resolve it on my end to save the date. Please forward any correspondence or cancellation emails the lodge sent you so I can review their administrative error. I want to help fix this. I hit send and set the device down. I walked to the kitchen to rinse my ceramic espresso cup. The water ran cold over the dark glaze. Before I could dry my hands, the phone chimed. Then it chimed a second time. My mother replied first. Her text was predictable, dripping with blind maternal enabling. "Thank you, Audrey," she wrote. "He is so stressed. Please fix this for your brother. Do not let them ruin his big day." 30 seconds later, an email notification appeared on my lock screen. Declan had taken the bait. He forwarded a message to my secure inbox. The subject line read, "Forward reservation cancellation notice. Urgent." I walked back into my office and opened the email on my large desktop monitor to view it in full resolution. The sender address displayed the official guest relations handle for the lodge, but the body of the text was a masterpiece of desperate incompetence. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the digital document. In the hospitality development sector, I review hundreds of legal contracts, zoning permits, and compliance audits every week. My brain is trained to detect inconsistencies in formatting. Declan had taken the official cancellation notice Valerie sent him and attempted to rewrite reality. The first paragraph matched standard corporate boilerplate. It expressed regret that the event was canceled. But the second paragraph, the section detailing the financial transaction, was a disaster. The font type shifted from a clean sans serif to a slightly heavier weight. The line spacing was uneven, jumping from single to double spacing without reason. He had deleted the sentence stating the refund was processed back to the corporate card. In its place, he had typed a jagged, poorly punctuated sentence claiming the deposit was forfeit due to sudden policy changes, but could be credited toward a new date if a direct cash wire was received by noon. He even altered the timestamp at the top of the header, failing to realize the email routing data at the bottom still reflected the original delivery time. I stared at the screen, letting the reality of his actions settle over me. This was the fifth layer of his deception. He was no longer just whining for a handout. He was committing digital forgery to extort funds from his own family. The boundary between a lazy sibling and an active fraudster vanished in that moment. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air outside my window. He was willing to fabricate legal documents to steal from me. He believed I was foolish enough to glance at a doctored email and immediately empty my bank account to save his wedding. I took a screenshot of his amateur handiwork and attached it to a secure internal message directed to Valerie at the resort. "Take a look at the narrative my brother is currently selling," I wrote. Her reply arrived 3 minutes later. The message contained a single word: wow. A moment later, my secure inbox received a heavy encrypted file from the Lodge server. Valerie had compiled the raw data. She sent the original, unaltered email she had dispatched to his address just an hour prior. More importantly, she included the back-end server logs. I opened the server logs. They provided a pristine, unarguable timeline of events. The logs displayed Declan's exact IP address originating from his apartment in Boulder. They documented the precise second he initiated the phone call to the front desk. They contained the audio transcript, notes Valerie had logged into the property management system, detailing his explicit demand for a direct cash wire to his personal checking account. The truth was captured in cold, hard metadata. Metadata does not lie. It does not get emotional. It does not try to guilt trip you over a holiday dinner. It simply records the facts. I opened the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk and pulled out a thick black leather binder. It was the same type of binder I used when presenting multi-million-dollar development proposals to city planning commissions. Today, I was using it to build a different kind of proposal. I walked over to the laser printer sitting on the credenza. The machine whirred to life, spitting out warm pages of irrefutable proof. I started assembling the trap. I took the original venue invoice my father had slid across the steakhouse table and slipped it into the first clear plastic sleeve. Next, I printed the transaction receipt from my corporate banking portal, showing the initial payment debit. That went into the second sleeve. Then came the refund confirmation proving the capital had safely returned to my holding company. Into the fourth sleeve went Valerie's original cancellation email, explicitly stating the funds were returned to Alpine Eco Resorts Holdings, LLC. Finally, I printed Declan's forged email. I placed it side by side with the authentic server logs and IP address tracking data in the center of the binder. The visual contrast between his frantic lies and the sterile corporate records was striking. I snapped the metal rings of the binder shut. The sound was sharp, definitive, echoing briefly in the quiet office. I ran my hand over the smooth leather cover. I was no longer operating as a sister trying to navigate a toxic family dynamic. I was functioning as a forensic investigator, conducting an audit on a fraud scheme. The familial connection dissolved, replaced by the clinical precision of a corporate executive protecting her assets. I felt no sorrow for my brother. He had built this snare, and I was merely laying out the components for everyone to see. While I was organizing the evidence, my phone began to vibrate continuously on the drafting table. The group text thread was erupting. Declan had apparently called our parents, selling them his fabricated story of corporate theft and a ruined wedding. He was spinning a tale of victimhood, painting the resort as a villainous entity holding his future hostage. My mother was sending paragraphs of frantic text. "Audrey, you need to fix this right now," she typed. "The caterer needs confirmation. Madison is inconsolable. Wire him the funds so he can secure the date." A moment later, a voicemail notification appeared. My father had bypassed texting altogether. I listened to the audio message. His tone was harsh, dripping with misplaced authority. "Audrey, your brother just explained the situation with the lodge. This is exactly why I told you to handle the deposit properly. You trusted some faceless booking agent instead of just giving Declan the money. Wire the funds to his account immediately before they give his weekend to someone else. Do not embarrass this family." They were rallying behind his lie. They were adopting his urgency, preparing to wage a campaign on his behalf. The private deception was no longer contained between Declan and myself. It was spilling outward, infecting my parents, and soon it would reach the extended relatives. My brother had decided to leverage the entire family structure to force my hand. The quiet morning was over, and the public smear campaign was just beginning to gather strength. The assault did not remain confined to my immediate relatives. By mid-afternoon, my smartphone transformed into a beacon of manufactured outrage. The device buzzed against the mahogany desk with a relentless rhythm. Declan had clearly spent his afternoon dialing every sympathetic ear in our family tree. He played the role of the devastated groom whose wealthy sister ruined his future. He weaponized their inherent biases. They already viewed me as distant because I prioritized my business over their weekend barbecues. Now they had a reason to justify their resentment. I unlocked the screen and scrolled through the barrage of incoming messages. The first text belonged to Uncle Robert. He was my father's older brother, a man who sold insurance and believed wealth was inherently suspicious unless he was the one holding it. "I cannot believe you let a venue slip away because you were too cheap to wire the cash," he wrote. "Your brother is devastated. You need to fix this mistake, Audrey." Right below his message sat a lengthy paragraph from cousin Sarah. She was Madison's designated bridesmaid. Her text dripped with condescension. "Madison has been crying for 3 hours, Audrey. How could you be so careless with the booking? You have the money. Just pay the fee and get their date back. Stop being so controlling." They all spoke with such certainty. They consumed Declan's fabricated narrative without questioning a single detail. He fed them a story where a faceless corporation stole his dream and his wealthy sister refused to help, and they swallowed it whole. I placed the phone back on the desk. The screen darkened. The silence in my office felt heavier now. The isolation was profound. This is the distinct burden of the family scapegoat. When you refuse to play the role of the silent provider, they do not just get angry. They attempt to rewrite your character. They project their own flaws onto you, painting you as the villain so they can remain the victims. My computer monitor chimed with a desktop notification. It was a social media alert. I clicked the icon and navigated to my mother's profile page. She had posted a public status update 10 minutes earlier. She did not use my name, but the target was unmistakable. She uploaded a picture of a wilting flower. The caption beneath it read, "It is heartbreaking when certain people let financial success turn their hearts to stone. Family should always support family, especially on the most important days of their lives. Praying for my son tonight." Dozens of comments already populated the section below her post. Extended relatives and family friends left sympathetic remarks, offering prayers and expressing disgust at the unnamed relative who betrayed her own blood. My mother was conducting a masterclass in passive aggression. She was leveraging public sympathy to exert digital pressure, hoping the collective shame would force my compliance. She wanted me to read those comments, feel the crushing weight of public disapproval, and immediately transfer $40,000 to her golden child, just to make the condemnation stop. I closed the browser tab. I did not type a defensive reply. I did not post my own status update explaining the truth. Engaging in a digital shouting match is a losing strategy. It validates their drama. It proves that their manipulative tactics can successfully penetrate your armor. I needed to clear my mind. I needed to step away from the digital noise and remind myself of the scale of the world outside their petty machinations. I grabbed my car keys and a thick wool jacket. I walked out of my house and climbed into my vehicle. The afternoon was fading, giving way to a crisp mountain evening. I drove west, leaving the suburban grid behind. I steered my vehicle toward the foothills, aiming for a place that always restored my perspective. The Red Rocks Amphitheater sits nestled in the transitional zone where the Great Plains meet the Rocky Mountains. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping below the jagged peaks, casting long, dramatic shadows across the ancient sandstone. I parked my car in the empty upper lot and walked toward the towering, monolithic rock formations. The air out here possessed a sharp, biting chill. The wind carved through the canyon, carrying the scent of dry earth and pine needles. I stood alone at the top of the stadium seating, looking down at the stage framed by geological structures. Creation Rock and Shiprock stood like silent, towering sentinels. These formations took hundreds of millions of years to form. They survived shifting tectonic plates, ancient oceans, and relentless erosion. They did not rush. They did not panic. They endured. I placed my hands in my jacket pockets, letting the biting wind rush past my face. My family's current outrage felt incredibly small against the backdrop of geological time. Their lies were temporary. Their fabricated panic was a fragile structure built on shifting sand. Declan thought he could control the narrative by being the first person to yell. My parents thought they could force my submission by rallying the extended family against me. They believed the sheer volume of their complaints would drown out the facts. But a lie is fundamentally exhausting to maintain. It requires constant energy, continuous patching, and frantic defense. The truth requires zero maintenance. The truth simply exists, unbothered and unmoving, exactly like the sandstone monoliths rising around me. I stood there until the sky turned a deep, bruised purple. The physical isolation of the empty amphitheater countered the emotional isolation my family tried to impose upon me. I realized that a private conversation would no longer suffice. I could not simply send the evidence binder to my father and expect him to apologize. If I dealt with this privately, my parents would bury the evidence. They would protect Declan, hide his attempted fraud, and continue whispering their false narrative to the rest of the family at every holiday gathering for the next decade. The lie had been made public, therefore the execution of that lie needed to be public. I needed an audience. I needed to present the irrefutable facts in an environment where my parents could not twist the narrative or sweep Declan's forgery under the rug. I needed a witness who commanded respect within the family hierarchy, someone whose testimony they could not discredit. I turned my back to the stage and walked up the gravel path toward my vehicle. My footsteps crunched rhythmically against the loose stones. The plan crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. I would not defend myself on the internet. I would invite them to a formal setting. I would create an environment governed by professional rules where emotional manipulation held zero currency. I sat in the driver's seat and turned the ignition. The engine purred to life, heating the cold interior. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened a fresh message window. I addressed the text to my parents and my brother. I kept the language stark and professional. I have arranged a meeting with my financial advisor and a representative connected to the venue I typed. We will convene tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock to resolve the missing deposit funds. We will meet in the executive conference room at my downtown workspace. Madison is expected to attend. I paused, considering the final crucial component of the trap. I needed the ultimate neutral party. I added one more recipient to the message, Aunt Helen. She was my father's eldest sister. She held the unofficial title of family matriarch. More importantly, she operated as the central hub of all family gossip. If Aunt Helen saw something, the entire family tree knew about it before dinner. I added a final sentence explaining her presence. Aunt Helen is invited to serve as an impartial mediator while we untangle this financial discrepancy. I hit send and shifted the car into drive. As I navigated the winding canyon road back toward the city lights, I felt a deep, resonant calm. The smear campaign was reaching its peak, but they were blindly accelerating toward a brick wall. They thought they were walking into a meeting to collect a check. They had no idea they were walking into an audit of their own deceit. The replies to my text message arrived in rapid succession. Declan responded first, sending a thumbs-up icon followed by a brief note stating he knew I would do the right thing. He genuinely believed my message was a white flag of surrender. In his mind, the phrase financial advisor simply meant I was consulting someone to liquidate assets or shuffle accounts in order to write him a hefty check. My father replied 10 minutes later with a curt sentence demanding I not waste their time. He treated the impending meeting like a nuisance he had to endure before collecting his toll. Aunt Helen responded last. Her text was enthusiastic and overly formal. She promised to attend with an open mind and a notepad. Aunt Helen is a retired real estate broker who treats family gossip like prime commercial property. She acquires the information, develops it, and distributes it for maximum social impact. She is my father's older sister and holds the unofficial title of family matriarch. She wields a casserole dish like a gavel and presides over every holiday dinner with a sharp eye for drama. If you need a secret kept, you move to another state. If you need a truth cemented into the permanent family legacy, you give her a front row seat. I invited her because my parents respect her opinion, and more importantly, they fear her judgment. Her presence guaranteed that whatever happened in that room would become the undeniable official version of events. The morning of the meeting dawned bright and clear. The Denver skyline reflected the sharp sunlight off its glass facades. I stood in my walk-in closet, assessing my wardrobe. I usually wore soft sweaters and casual denim when visiting my parents. That attire softened my edges and made me look like the subservient daughter they preferred. Today required a different uniform. Today required armor. I reached past the casual clothing and selected a tailored charcoal blazer matching pleated trousers and a crisp white silk blouse. The fabric felt cool and structured against my skin. I stepped into a pair of black leather pumps and fastened a minimalist silver watch around my left wrist. This was the exact outfit I wore when negotiating multi-million-dollar land acquisitions with hostile municipal zoning boards. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was not a sibling seeking approval. She was the chief executive officer of Alpine Eco Resorts. The transformation was internal as much as it was visual. I was deliberately locking away the familial obligation and stepping into a realm governed by contracts, strict liabilities, and undeniable proof. Before leaving the house, I initiated a secure video call with Valerie. She sat at her desk at the lodge looking sharp and alert in her navy blue uniform. "We need the physical documentation," I told her. "Every policy, every timestamp, every rule he broke." Valerie nodded and shared her desktop screen. We combed through the resort terms of service line by line. I printed the specific page, highlighting the strict anti-fraud refund policy. I used a bright yellow marker to highlight the specific clause that prohibited third-party wire transfers. Next came the cancellation logs. Valerie transmitted the verified audio transcript of Declan demanding the cash wire. The text detailed his exact words, capturing his frantic attempts to bypass the security protocols. I printed the transcript on heavy bond paper. The laser printer in the corner of my office hummed steadily, producing sheet after sheet of stark reality. I took the fresh pages and organized them chronologically into the black leather binder. The original venue invoice went first. The corporate payment receipt followed. Then came the refund confirmation, the forged email Declan sent me, the authentic server logs, the legal policies, and the audio transcripts. The binder felt substantial in my hands. It possessed physical weight. It was a tangible manifestation of my brother's deceit. By 1 o'clock, I drove downtown and arrived at a premium co-working space situated in the heart of the Denver Financial District. I maintain a membership there for occasions when I need to host urban meetings away from the mountain properties. The environment is engineered to project authority and sterile efficiency. The floors are polished concrete, the lighting is stark and modern, and the walls are constructed of thick, soundproof glass. I approached the concierge desk and confirmed my reservation for the executive boardroom. The receptionist handed me a magnetic keycard with a polite nod. I walked down the long corridor, my heels clicking a steady, unyielding rhythm against the concrete. The sound was sharp and rhythmic, resembling a metronome counting down to the final confrontation. I swiped the keycard and entered the boardroom. The space featured a long, rectangular table carved from a single slab of reclaimed walnut. 10 ergonomic leather chairs surrounded the wood. The room smelled of ozone and expensive furniture polish. I chose the seat at the head of the table, facing the heavy glass doors. This position allowed me to see anyone approaching down the hallway, while forcing them to walk toward me upon entering. I placed the black leather binder directly in front of me, aligning it perfectly parallel to the edge of the wood. I poured a glass of ice water from a glass pitcher and set it to my right. I did not bring a notepad. I did not bring a pen. I had nothing to write down because the narrative was already finished. I only needed to read it aloud. I checked my silver watch. It was 1:45. They would arrive soon. I knew exactly how they would enter this space. Declan would walk in expecting a lucrative payout, probably carrying a smug expression. My parents would enter, prepared to lecture me on family unity, while quietly securing the funds for their golden child. Madison would be there to play the grieving bride, dabbing her eyes and ready to accept my apology along with my money. They believed they held all the leverage. They assumed the location was merely a neutral ground I rented to finalize my surrender. They thought I needed an audience to witness my submission. I sat in the silent, air-conditioned room, watching the hallway through the glass walls. My pulse remained steady. The anticipation built, not from fear, but from the quiet satisfaction of a properly executed plan. They had spent their entire lives treating my hard work like a communal asset they could tap whenever they felt entitled. They had launched a smear campaign, weaponized our relatives, and attempted to paint me as a villain to hide a theft. The elevator bell chimed softly in the distance. I saw shadows moving past the frosted glass of the lobby partition. The doors of the boardroom were about to open, and the grand illusion they had spent decades building was about to shatter against the cold, hard floor of reality. At exactly 1:55, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung inward. The ambient hum of the downtown Denver traffic faded as the thick acoustic seals engaged behind the entering group. Aunt Helen crossed the threshold first. She wore a structured tweed blazer and carried a rigid leather folio. Her eyes scanned the polished concrete floor, the reclaimed walnut table, and finally locked onto me. She gave a single curt nod. She did not offer a hug. Aunt Helen treats family disputes like corporate litigation. She took her seat at the far end of the long table, opened her folio, and clicked a silver ballpoint pen. My parents entered next. Thomas and Patricia walked shoulder to shoulder, projecting a unified front of profound disappointment. My father wore his golf club attire, a crisp polo shirt and tailored slacks, attempting to signal that this meeting was merely a minor interruption to his otherwise leisurely day. His jaw was tight, his posture radiated deep irritation. My mother walked half a step behind him. She gripped a designer handbag tightly against her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, colorless line. They selected chairs directly across from me. They did not offer a greeting. They simply sat, radiating a practiced, stony disapproval designed to make me feel small. Declan and Madison arrived last. My brother carried a thin manila folder tucked under his arm like a shield. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, projecting the image of a man rolling up his sleeves to fix a crisis. His chest puffed out slightly. He thought he possessed the winning hand. He believed the folder under his arm held the key to extracting $40,000 from my bank account. Madison trailed behind him, holding a crumpled tissue. She dabbed at the corners of her eyes, taking care not to smudge her expensive mascara. She played the role of the shattered bride perfectly, ensuring everyone in the room noticed her manufactured grief. Declan pulled out a chair for her, then sat down to my left. The physical arrangement of the room mirrored a tribunal. 5 of them, positioned around the edges, boxing me in at the head of the table. I sat alone. My hands rested flat on either side of the closed black leather binder. My father did not wait for anyone to settle. He leaned forward, placing both forearms on the walnut surface. The gold watch on his wrist caught the harsh overhead light. "We are not going to spend the afternoon debating this, Audrey," he began. His tone was sharp, meant to cut through any defense I might offer. "Your brother has endured enough stress today. We told you to handle the venue deposit. Instead of simply writing him a check, you tried to manage the transaction yourself, and your incompetence cost him the reservation." I looked at him. I did not blink. I did not interrupt. I let his insult hang in the sterile air of the boardroom. "You owe this family an apology," he continued, his volume increasing as he sought to dominate the space. "But more importantly, you owe your brother a solution." Declan secured a brief grace period to save the date. "We are here to watch you wire those funds into his account right now. You are going to fix the mess you created." My mother sighed heavily, adjusting her handbag on the table. She looked at Aunt Helen, ensuring the family matriarch registered her maternal suffering. "We just want peace," Patricia said. Her voice trembled slightly, a masterful deployment of fake fragility. "We want to stop fighting. Just do the right thing, Audrey, please." I shifted my gaze down the table. Aunt Helen watched the exchange with rapt attention. Her silver pen scratched across the notepad. She was documenting every accusation, every demand, every sigh. She was recording the official family history. I turned my attention to my brother. Declan sat upright, his hand resting on his manila folder. A faint sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. Adrenaline. He was close to the finish line, and his body knew it. "Dad and Mom seem very certain about the sequence of events," I said. My voice was smooth, flat, and quiet. The contrast between my father's booming demands and my measured tone forced everyone to lean in slightly to hear me. But since we are resolving a financial discrepancy on the record, I think it is best if we hear the exact details directly from the source. I gestured toward my brother. "Declan," I said, "tell Aunt Helen exactly what happened with the venue. Walk us through the crisis so we all understand why the money needs to bypass the resort and go directly into your personal checking account." Declan straightened his posture. He cleared his throat. He looked at Aunt Helen, recognizing that convincing her meant winning the war. He opened his manila folder, revealing a few sheets of paper, keeping them angled away from my view. "I called the Alpine Crest Lodge this morning to finalize our catering menu," he started. His delivery was smooth. He had spent hours rehearsing this monologue, but the receptionist could not find our confirmation number. She transferred me to a manager. That manager informed me that due to a massive glitch in their booking software, our reservation was wiped out. They deleted the entire September calendar. Aunt Helen stopped writing. She peered at Declan over the rim of her reading glasses. "A glitch," she repeated. "Yes," Declan nodded vigorously. "A total system failure. I asked them to just re-enter the data, but they claimed the deposit Audrey submitted was locked in a frozen merchant account. They said they cannot access the initial $40,000, and it will take months for the bank to reverse the charge." He turned his gaze toward me, projecting righteous indignation. He was playing the hero fighting a corrupt corporation. "The manager told me we lost the date," Declan pressed on. "I argued with them for an hour. I begged them not to ruin Madison's wedding. Finally, they offered a loophole. They said if I can wire a new $40,000 deposit directly to their emergency holding account by the end of business today, they will manually override the system and give us our weekend back." My father slapped the table with his open palm. A resounding crack echoed in the glass room. "There you have it," Thomas declared. "The venue screwed up, the card is frozen. The only path forward is a direct wire transfer. You need to pull the money from your savings, Audrey. Send it to Declan. He will walk into his bank and wire it to the lodge himself. He is taking control of the situation because you failed to secure it." I let my father's declaration fade into the background noise of the city outside. I kept my eyes fixed on my brother. The intricate web of lies he spun was astonishing. He had constructed a scenario that perfectly justified liquidating $40,000 into his personal possession. He painted the venue as the antagonist and himself as the desperate savior. "I understand," I said softly. I shifted my focus to the woman sitting beside him. Madison had stopped dabbing her eyes. She was watching me, waiting for the capitulation she believed was imminent. "Madison," I said. She jumped slightly at the sound of her name. "Yes," she replied. I kept my hands resting on the closed leather binder. I needed to lock every single door in the room before I turned the key. I needed to ensure nobody could claim ignorance once the truth hit the table. Declan just described a very chaotic morning, I noted. A canceled venue, a frozen credit card, a demand for a replacement cash wire. This is a significant crisis. Were you aware of this plan? Did Declan discuss this emergency protocol with you before walking into this room? Madison looked at Declan. Declan offered her an encouraging, confident nod. He thought my question was a sign of surrender, a final check before I opened my digital wallet. She turned back to me. Her expression hardened into a glare of righteous entitlement. She nodded enthusiastically. "Of course I knew about the plan, Audrey. We talked about it all morning. We have been so stressed. The venue treated us horribly. Declan is just trying to save our wedding. We both agreed that wiring him the money is the only way to fix this disaster." The pen in Aunt Helen's hand scratched against the paper recording the final damning sentence. Madison had just confirmed her own complicity. She had tied herself to the anchor Declan was about to throw overboard. The silence in the glass-walled room stretched tight, vibrating like a piano wire about to snap. They sat there, a unified front of arrogance and deceit, waiting for me to pull out my laptop and surrender my capital. My father glared. My mother pouted. Declan smirked. Madison waited. I slowly pulled my hands back from the edges of the table. I rested my fingers on the cover of the black leather binder. The trap was baited. The prey was inside. The door was locked. Now it was time to show them what they had actually walked into. Declan reached into his manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of standard printer paper. He pushed it across the long expanse of the reclaimed walnut table. The paper glided over the polished wood and came to a halt right at the edge of my black leather binder. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. A smug expression settled onto his face. He believed he had just dealt the winning hand. He thought that printed page was the undeniable proof that would force my compliance and open the floodgates to his payday. I looked down at the document. I did not rush to pick it up. I let the anticipation build in the room. I reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal blazer and retrieved my wire-rimmed reading glasses. I unfolded the metal arms with deliberate slowness and placed them on my face. Only then did I lift the piece of paper. The texture felt cheap and flimsy between my fingers, a stark contrast to the heavy cardstock of the authentic venue invoice my father had presented the night before. I scanned the page with clinical detachment. The top of the email contained the official guest relations logo of the Alpine Crest Lodge. The opening paragraph offered a standard corporate apology regarding a canceled event. But my eyes immediately zeroed in on the second paragraph. This was the section where Declan had attempted to rewrite his reality. "Declan," I began, keeping my voice remarkably level, "this is a fascinating piece of correspondence." He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward again, eager to capitalize on his supposed victory. "It proves everything I just told you," he said. "The management sent that to me this morning. They canceled the booking. They demanded a direct cash wire to reinstate the date. It is all right there in black and white." I lowered the paper slightly and looked at him over the rims of my glasses. "I am looking closely at the second paragraph," I noted. "I am tracing the exact line where the email discusses the forfeiture of my initial payment and the sudden requirement for a personal bank transfer." "Yes," he urged, his knee bouncing slightly under the table. "Read it." "I do not need to read it aloud to notice the structural inconsistencies," I replied. "The first portion of this email is typed in a clean sans serif font. However, exactly at the point where the financial instructions change, the typeface abruptly switches to Times New Roman. The text size increases by a full point. The line spacing expands uncharacteristically. Furthermore, the margins on this specific paragraph do not align with the corporate header at the top of the page. It appears as though someone copied a block of text from a different word processing document and pasted it directly into the middle of a professional email without bothering to match the formatting. The smug confidence drained from Declan's face in an instant. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He stared at me, processing the reality that his deception was unraveling over a choice of typography. He shifted his weight nervously, the leather chair squeaking beneath him. "It is a computer glitch," he stammered. His voice lost its smooth, rehearsed cadence. It cracked slightly. "I told you their entire system crashed today. The formatting got messed up when they generated the automated message. You are focusing on the wrong details, Audrey. The font does not matter. The message matters." Before I could address his desperate pivot, my father intervened. Thomas slapped his open palm against the table for the second time. The sharp sound echoed off the glass walls of the boardroom. He glared at me, his face flushing a deep shade of crimson. "Enough," Thomas shouted. His voice boomed through the confined space. My father built his career in regional logistics. He was accustomed to barking orders on loading docks and having subordinates scatter to fulfill his demands. He operated on intimidation. He despised being challenged, especially by his daughter. He viewed my success as a personal affront to his authority, an imbalance he constantly sought to correct by forcing me to subsidize his favorite child. "You are deflecting, Audrey," he accused, pointing a rigid finger across the table. "You are sitting there picking apart fonts and line spacing because you want to dodge your responsibility. Your brother just handed you physical proof that the venue ruined his wedding. Instead of doing your duty and writing the check to fix it, you are playing detective to get out of paying. You promised to handle this. You failed. Now you are trying to humiliate him to cover up your own incompetence." The sheer projection in his outburst was staggering. He was accusing me of the exact behavior his son was currently executing. Right on cue, my mother deployed her favorite weapon. Patricia let out a loud, shuddering gasp. She brought a trembling hand to her mouth and allowed the tears to spill over her eyelashes. She possessed a terrifying ability to summon genuine tears the moment she needed to shift a narrative from logic to emotion. Whenever my father's anger failed to break my boundaries, my mother's weaponized fragility was designed to make me feel like a monster for holding my ground. "I cannot believe you are acting like this," Patricia wailed. She reached over and placed a comforting hand on Declan's shoulder, treating the grown man like a wounded toddler. "Your brother is in crisis. He is losing the most important day of his life, and you sit there interrogating him like he is a criminal." She grabbed a tissue from her designer handbag and dabbed at her cheeks. Her weeping grew louder, designed to fill the room with inescapable guilt. "I always feared this would happen to you," Patricia sobbed, looking at Aunt Helen to ensure her performance was being registered. "I always worried that acquiring so much wealth would turn your heart to stone. You have become so cold, Audrey, so calculated. You care more about your money than you care about your own flesh and blood. You are punishing Declan just because he needs your help. It is cruel. It is just cruel." Madison chimed in, mimicking my mother's distress. She sniffled loudly and leaned her head against Declan's arm. "It is just so unfair," Madison whispered, casting a resentful glare in my direction. I sat at the head of the table and absorbed the emotional barrage. I did not flinch. I did not offer a defense. I did not attempt to interrupt my father's shouting or my mother's weeping. When you are dealing with people who use manufactured outrage as a shield, the most devastating thing you can do is let them exhaust their ammunition. If you argue back, you give them a target. If you remain silent, their hysteria eventually runs out of fuel and falls flat against the quiet reality of the room. I waited. I watched my father breathe heavily, his chest heaving under his polo shirt. I watched my mother dab her dry eyes, realizing her tears were not producing the desired capitulation. I watched Declan shrinking slightly in his chair, hoping the storm his parents generated would somehow blow the forged email off the table. Aunt Helen sat frozen at the far end of the room, her pen hovering over her notepad, her eyes darting between my stoic posture and the chaos unfolding across from me. Slowly the shouting subsided, the weeping tapered off into dramatic sighs. The room fell quiet again, the silence returning with a heavy, suffocating weight. They had thrown their best emotional punches, and I was still sitting upright, entirely unmoved. I reached forward and picked up Declan's forged paper. I placed it neatly to the side of my workspace. Then I placed my hands on the cover of the black leather binder resting in front of me. I slid the heavy binder forward, moving it to the exact center of the reclaimed walnut table. I flipped the thick leather cover open. The metal rings gleamed under the harsh overhead lighting. "Since we are currently sharing documents," I said. My voice was even devoid of any anger or sorrow. It was the voice of a chief executive officer calling a board meeting to order. "I think we should expand our review beyond this single piece of paper. I think we should look at the original server logs from the venue." The shift in the room's energy was instantaneous. It was palpable. The residual arrogance evaporated, replaced by a sudden sharp current of apprehension. My father stiffened. My mother lowered her tissue. Declan stared at the open binder, his eyes widening as he recognized the thick stack of printed evidence waiting inside. He did not know exactly what I possessed, but the sight of those organized tabbed pages signaled the end of his illusion. The trap had officially snapped shut. I reached into the back pocket of my black leather binder. The compartment held multiple stapled packets of the unedited metadata and transcripts I had printed earlier that morning. I extracted the stacks of paper, feeling the crisp edges against my fingertips. I did not slide the first packet to my father. I did not offer a copy to my mother. I stood up from my ergonomic chair, leaned across the expansive walnut table, and handed the primary copy directly to Aunt Helen. The family matriarch accepted the documents with a cautious frown. She adjusted her reading glasses, pushing the frames higher on the bridge of her nose. I proceeded to distribute the remaining packets down the center of the table. My father snatched his copy with a heavy scowl, clearly annoyed by the sheer volume of paper. My mother looked at the stapled sheets as if they were covered in a hazardous substance. Declan stared at the packet resting near his hands, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "What you are holding is a certified back-end server export from the Guest Relations Department at the Alpine Crest Lodge," I stated. My voice remained unhurried, echoing slightly off the thick glass walls of the boardroom. "Please direct your attention to the second page." Aunt Helen turned the page. The rustle of paper was the only sound in the sterile room. Her eyes scanned the dense blocks of data, tracking the rows of digital information. "The logs confirm a phone call was initiated to the venue front desk at exactly 8:15 this morning." I continued pacing my words to ensure every syllable landed with maximum impact. The originating IP address recorded by the server matches the router registered to Declan's apartment in Boulder. The document also contains the verified audio transcript logged by the general manager who personally handled the incoming call. I watched Aunt Helen read the dialogue blocks. The color began to drain from her cheeks. The matriarch of the Prescott family, a woman who thrived on suburban scandals and country club rumors, was currently digesting a level of deceit that surpassed her wildest neighborhood gossip. Her lips parted slightly in disbelief. Let me summarize the transcript for those struggling to read the fine print I offered, projecting my voice to command the entire space. The venue did not experience a system failure. They did not delete the September calendar. The reservation was manually revoked because the groom called the front desk and demanded an immediate cancellation, citing a fabricated family emergency. My mother gasped. This time it was not a theatrical performance. It was a sharp intake of authentic shock. She turned her head slowly, looking at her son with wide, uncomprehending eyes. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on Declan. He was sitting rigidly, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the armrests of his leather chair. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. Furthermore, I pushed forward. Tightening the psychological vice, Declan was explicitly informed by the manager that the $40,000 deposit would automatically route back to the original method of payment. At that exact moment, his demeanor shifted. The transcript shows him demanding that the venue bypass the initial credit card and wire the funds directly into his personal checking account. He dictated his routing number over the phone, attempting to secure the capital for his own use. The boardroom descended into a suffocating vacuum. The air felt dangerously thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out through the ventilation vents. The grand illusion was shattering piece by piece, exposing the ugly, greedy core of my brother's machinations. Declan finally shattered the silence. He leaped out of his chair. The heavy piece of furniture scraped harshly against the polished concrete floor, a jarring noise that made my mother flinch. "These are fake!" he screamed. His voice was shrill, cracking under the crushing weight of his exposure. He pointed a trembling finger at my face, his chest heaving. "She printed these out at her house. She typed this up to frame me because she hates me. I never said any of that on the phone. You cannot believe her. She is trying to ruin my life so she does not have to pay for the wedding." He looked wildly at our father, begging the patriarch to intervene and crush the rebellion. He desperately needed his lifelong enabler to flip the table and validate his frantic lies. I did not raise my voice to match his hysteria. I did not stand up to physically intimidate him. I simply remained seated, projecting the immovable calm of the Rocky Mountain sandstone. I turned the page in my own binder, tracing my finger down the final document. "Turn to the final page in your packets," I instructed. Aunt Helen flipped the paper without hesitation. My father did the same, his hands suddenly moving with a jerky, uncertain rhythm. He stared at the page, his eyes darting back and forth as he tried to comprehend the financial ledger printed before him. "That is a certified statement from my corporate operating account," I explained, slicing through Declan's frantic shouting. "Look at the timestamp on the pending credit. 10 minutes after Declan demanded a cash wire, the transaction cleared." I looked directly into my brother's terrified eyes, ensuring he felt the full weight of his failure. "The venue flagged your request as fraud, Declan," I said. The acoustics of the boardroom amplified the cold finality of my words. They recognized an unauthorized attempt to divert a massive sum of capital. They shut down your scheme immediately, canceled the event per your explicit instructions, and they refunded the card that actually paid for it. My card. The revelation detonated upon the walnut table. The math finally added up for everyone in the room. Declan had traded his entire future, his luxury wedding, and his reputation for a failed cash grab. He had orchestrated the destruction of his own dream just to steal from his sister, and he had walked away with nothing but a canceled reservation. Madison turned slowly to look at her fiancé. The pristine image of the wealthy, misunderstood tech founder dissolved before her very eyes. She was staring at a man who intentionally torched their premier mountain wedding so he could pocket the deposit money and leave his sister holding the bag. Her jaw hung slack. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. The 2-carat diamond ring on her finger suddenly looked like a hollow prop purchased with someone else's resources. She realized she was marrying a grifter who valued a quick payday over their shared future. Declan stood completely exposed in front of the ultimate family gossip. Aunt Helen closed her folio with a definitive, echoing snap. She had seen the authentic documents. She had read the tracking data. She understood the depth of the theft. The golden child was revealed as a common thief, and the story would echo through every branch of the family tree by nightfall. The initial lie was dismantled, leaving a wreckage of broken trust and humiliated egos. But a family built on decades of denial does not surrender to the truth gracefully. I watched my parents process the inescapable reality resting on the table in front of them. The logical response would be horror. The appropriate reaction would be to condemn the son who just attempted to defraud their daughter. Yet, as the silence stretched tight across the room, I saw the familiar defensive posture hardening in my father's shoulders. The confrontation was far from over, because confronting a lie is easy, but confronting the enablers who built the liar requires an entirely different level of warfare. The silence following my revelation settled into the boardroom like a heavy winter snowbank. The printed documents lay scattered across the reclaimed walnut surface, the server data, the audio transcripts, the banking ledger. Together they formed a comprehensive autopsy of a financial crime. I watched my parents absorb the inescapable facts. A rational mother and father would look at the evidence and express profound horror. They would demand a strict explanation from the son who just attempted to siphon $40,000 from his own sibling. They would offer an immediate apology to the daughter they had falsely accused of negligence. My parents do not operate within the realm of rational parental instincts. Patricia Prescott spent her entire adult life meticulously curating a flawless suburban facade. She viewed our family reputation as a fragile porcelain collection, and Declan was the undisputed centerpiece. Admitting her golden boy was a common thief meant acknowledging her own fundamental failure to raise an honorable man. She could not process that reflection. Therefore, her mind instinctively constructed an alternate universe, where his blatant theft was merely a creative misunderstanding, and my exposure of it was the genuine crime. "He was just trying to manage the budget," my mother blurted out. Her tone was desperate and high-pitched, scraping against the acoustic glass of the conference room. She reached across the chairs and grabbed Declan by the forearm, anchoring herself to his rapidly sinking ship. "He is trying to launch a technology startup, Audrey. He understands how expensive these events become. He probably realized the lodge was overcharging us and simply wanted to control the capital to negotiate better terms himself. You are twisting his intentions to make him look bad." The sheer audacity of her rationalization was breathtaking. She looked at a verified transcript of her son attempting to commit wire fraud and decided to rebrand it as proactive financial management. She was willing to bend reality until it shattered, just to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. Thomas swiftly joined the defense perimeter. He leaned his heavy frame forward, his face flushed a deep crimson. "You should have just given him the cash like we originally requested," my father bellowed. His voice carried the booming cadence of a man used to bullying warehouse supervisors into submission. "You caused this entire disaster by insisting on paying the vendor directly. You treated your own brother like a delinquent who could not be trusted with a simple checkbook. If you had just wired the money to his personal account yesterday evening, none of this administrative confusion would have occurred." I observed them with clinical fascination. They were entirely predictable. When cornered by undeniable proof enablers, do not dismantle the lie. They attack the person holding the truth. My father built his regional logistics career on intimidation, believing that if he shouted loud enough, the facts would somehow change their shape to fit his preference. He looked at the printed evidence of his son's stealing and decided the real issue was my lack of blind trust.
Well, you possess the refund now, Thomas demanded, pointing a rigid finger at my chest.
The ledger shows the credit cleared your account this morning. The venue is gone. We are back to square one. Write the check to Declan right now. He needs that capital today to secure a replacement location before the fall season books up. Stop punishing your brother for taking initiative. Write the check and we can put this ugly misunderstanding behind us.
Anne Helen dropped her silver ballpoint pen. The metal instrument clattered sharply against the hard wood. The sharp noise snapped through the heavy air of the boardroom. She stared at her younger brother with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The family matriarch, a woman who spent decades navigating the complex social politics of our extended relatives, was currently witnessing a display of toxic favoritism that defied all bounds of basic decency. She looked at Thomas and Patricia as if they were strangers wearing stolen clothing. They were defending a grifter in broad daylight, demanding a reward for a failed heist. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair.
I did not feel the familiar sting of parental betrayal. The emotional wounds they used to inflict had long since calloused over, replaced by the durable armor I forged building my eco-resort empire in the Rocky Mountains. Instead of feeling hurt, I felt like a biologist studying a fascinating poisonous organism under a microscope. Everything suddenly became crystalline. It was never about a mountain wedding. The pristine catering menus, the panoramic views of the Continental Divide, the luxurious floral arrangements, they were all just elaborate props in a long con, designed to extract my hard-earned resources and funnel them directly into Declan's bank account. My parents knew his startup was a hollow failure. They knew he could not sustain his lifestyle working part-time at a ski shop. But rather than forcing him to grow up, they orchestrated a scenario where I would fund his existence under the guise of familial duty. The $40,000 was meant to be a massive cash injection to keep his illusion floating for another year. Madison sat frozen in her chair, her eyes darting between my shouting father and her humiliated fiancé. She finally realized the depth of the dysfunction she was about to marry into. She was not securing a wealthy lifestyle. She was joining a family that survived by cannibalizing its most productive member. She pulled her hand away from Declan, shrinking back into the upholstery. I let their desperate, illogical defense hang in the air. I allowed the silence to stretch, giving Aunt Helen ample time to digest the full extent of my parents' delusion. I wanted the family historian to memorize this exact moment. I wanted her to remember the sight of Thomas demanding a payout for a crime that was documented on the table in front of him. My father glared at me, waiting for my submission. My mother sniffled, projecting her weaponized sorrow. Declan refused to meet my gaze, staring blankly at the polished concrete floor. I rested my hands on the black leather binder. The final piece of the puzzle remained hidden on the very last page. I had guided them through the maze of their own deception, letting them trigger every tripwire along the path. Now they were standing at the edge of the cliff, entirely unaware of the drop waiting below their feet. I looked directly at my father. I kept my voice soft, forcing him to strain slightly to hear the words. You are demanding that I hand Declan $40,000 because you believe the lodge acted inappropriately? I stated softly. You are operating under the assumption that a luxury mountain resort randomly decided to intercept a phone call, flag a transaction as fraudulent, and return the capital to the original payer without any external prompt. I shifted my gaze to my mother, then finally to Declan. Let me ask you a very simple question, I said. The tone of my voice dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Why do you think the venue bypassed the groom and called me directly to report the fraud? The question landed like a physical blow. The shouting ceased instantly. Thomas furrowed his brow, his mind grinding against a variable he had not anticipated. Patricia stopped dabbing her eyes, a look of profound confusion washing over her features. Declan lifted his head, his face contorting as he tried to process the implication. They froze. They were wandering blindly through a dark room, and my question was the sound of the deadbolt locking behind them. They had no idea they had just walked into the ultimate checkmate. The question lingered in the sterile air of the boardroom. Why do you think the venue bypassed the groom and called me directly to report the fraud?
Thomas narrowed his eyes, his mind struggling to process a variable outside his established worldview. He opened his mouth to formulate an excuse, perhaps to claim the booking agent simply recognized my name on the payment ledger, but the words died in his throat. Patricia glanced sideways at her husband, seeking the usual reassurance he provided whenever their narrative encountered resistance. He offered none. Declan stared blankly at the walnut wood, his breathing shallow and rapid, the silence stretched tight, vibrating with unspoken panic. I did not rush their comprehension. I reached for the final plastic sleeve tucked into the back cover of my black leather binder. The document inside was not an email. It was not a banking receipt. It was a certified legal instrument, printed on heavy stock paper bearing the embossed seal of the State of Colorado Secretary of State. I pulled the pristine sheet from the sleeve. The texture was rough and authoritative against my fingertips. I slid the primary copy across the table. It glided smoothly, coming to a rest precisely equidistant between my mother and my father. I distributed duplicate copies to Aunt Helen, Declan, and Madison. Aunt Helen adjusted her reading glasses once more. She studied the header. Articles of Organization. Below that, the registered entity name stood out in bold typography, Alpine Eco Resorts Holdings, LLC. And further down, under the section detailing the registered agents and managing members, my full legal name occupied the top line, Audrey Elena Prescott, Chief Executive Officer and Majority Shareholder. They bypassed the groom, I said, my voice cutting through the thick silence because I own the venue. The words struck the room with the force of a physical impact. I kept my gaze locked on my brother. You did not just try to defraud a random hospitality corporation, Declan. You tried to steal $40,000 from my own company. You attempted to wire corporate capital out of my business account directly into your personal checking. Declan looked at the state seal on the paper, his jaw unhinged. The smug, entitled groom vanished, replaced by a terrified man realizing he had just attempted grand larceny against the one person holding his entire family together. He had assumed I was merely a wealthy sister he could manipulate with a fabricated crisis. He never fathomed I was the architect of the very stage he selected for his wedding. His entire scheme crumbled, exposing a level of betrayal that transcended sibling rivalry and entered the territory of criminal intent. I shifted my attention to my parents. The physical transformation in Thomas and Patricia was profound. The color drained from my father's face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. The booming patriarch, the man who spent the last hour pounding his fists and demanding obedience, suddenly looked small and fragile. His eyes darted from the legal registration to my face, struggling to reconcile the subservient daughter he bullied with the powerful executive sitting across from him. He had spent his career managing regional logistics, believing he held the ultimate authority in every room. Now he was sitting in an office I rented, looking at a company I built, realizing his entire sense of superiority was a fragile illusion. Patricia pressed her hands flat against the table. Her manufactured sorrow evaporated. She was a woman who worshipped prestige above all else. She had spent weeks bragging to her country club friends about the exclusive, impossible-to-book mountain lodge her son had secured for his nuptials. She had gloated about the reclaimed timber, the organic catering menu, and the panoramic views of the Continental Divide. She used that venue as a status symbol to elevate her own social standing. Now the realization crashed over her that the elite luxury brand she worshipped belonged entirely to the daughter she treated like an afterthought. The power dynamic they spent 33 years enforcing shattered in an instant. They had built their authority on the assumption that I needed their approval. They believed they held the upper hand because they possessed the loudest voices and the most demanding expectations. But volume cannot defeat ownership. I did not just win a family argument. I dismantled their entire reality. I owned the land. I owned the building. I employed the staff they tried to intimidate. I was the sovereign of the domain they attempted to rob. A sharp, grating noise pierced the quiet room. Madison pushed her chair back with sudden force. The metal legs screeched against the polished concrete floor, a harsh sound that made everyone flinch. She stood up, her chest heaving. The faux distress she wore earlier dissolved, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. She looked down at Declan.
He was paralyzed, unable to offer a single word of defense. He sat frozen, staring at the corporate registration as if it were a death sentence. Madison possessed her own brand of entitlement, but she was not blind to basic mathematics. She processed the facts laid out before her with ruthless efficiency. Declan had zero capital. He had no startup. He had no luxury wedding venue. He had publicly humiliated himself in front of the family matriarch, revealing himself as a desperate thief who tried to extort his highly successful sister and failed spectacularly. The illusion of his limitless potential vanished, leaving behind a broke, unemployed man who lived in a fantasy world funded by his parents. She realized she was attaching herself to a sinking liability. Madison did not scream. She did not throw a tantrum or demand an explanation. She simply stared at him with profound disgust. The contrast between her initial weeping and her current icy detachment highlighted the transactional nature of their relationship. She had signed up for a premier lifestyle, and Declan had just proven he could not even afford the deposit. Aunt Helen watched the scene unfold with rapt fascination. She carefully folded the legal document and placed it inside her rigid leather folio. She clicked her silver pen shut. The historian had gathered all the necessary facts. She looked at Thomas with an expression blending pity and disdain. The golden child was a fraud, and the parents who enabled him were now accomplices to his public humiliation. The story she would carry back to the extended relatives was no longer about a negligent sister ruining a wedding. It was a detailed account of an attempted heist thwarted by the very woman they sought to victimize. I remained seated at the head of the walnut table. I felt no urge to gloat. The quiet justice of the Colorado ethos guided my posture. You build a strong foundation, you withstand the storms, and you let the elements expose the rot in unstable structures. My family had spent decades treating my hard work as a communal resource pool. They assumed my wealth made me soft, eager to purchase their fleeting affection. Instead, my wealth provided the exact mechanism needed to expose their foundational decay. The silence in the boardroom stretched thick and unyielding. Nobody dared to speak. The evidence was irrefutable. The forged email, the audio transcripts, the server logs, and the corporate ownership registration lay scattered across the table, forming an inescapable cage of truth. My parents realized they possessed zero leverage. They could not threaten to withhold their love because I had just proven I did not need it. They could not smear my reputation because Aunt Helen held the physical proof of their son's guilt. They were entirely disarmed. Declan finally buried his face in his hands, an involuntary gesture of total defeat. His shoulders slumped, the arrogant posture he carried into the room entirely broken. The meeting had achieved its purpose. The lie was dead, the truth was documented, and the boundaries were permanently drawn. I sat in the cool, air-conditioned air, watching the wreckage of their lazy entitlement settle around them, preparing to deliver the final terms of their surrender. The metallic clatter of platinum against reclaimed walnut broke the stifling silence. Madison slid her hand across the polished wood. She did not merely place the 2-carat diamond on the surface, she hurled it. The expensive jewelry spun wildly, catching the harsh overhead illumination before coming to a rest near Declan's trembling fingers. She stared at the man she almost married. Her voice lacked its previous theatrical sorrow. It was entirely flat, stripped of all affection. "You are a pathetic liar, Declan," she stated. "You traded our entire future for a cash grab you could not even execute properly. You are broke. You have no venue. You have no bride." Madison grabbed her designer purse from the floor. She turned on her heel and marched toward the heavy glass exit. Her footsteps slammed against the concrete. The doors swung open and sealed shut behind her, leaving a profound vacuum in the space she vacated. Declan remained motionless. He did not reach for the discarded jewelry. He did not look up to meet the gazes of the people surrounding him. The paralysis of total ruin anchored him to his leather chair. The grand fantasy he constructed dissolved into ash. He spent his whole life believing his charm in our parents' checkbook could insulate him from reality. Now the insulation was gone. He was exposed as a common thief sitting in a rented conference room, stripped of his dignity and his relationship. His dream of easy money and a luxury wedding vanished instantly, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man who finally ran out of shortcuts. The departure of the bride acted as a defibrillator on my father. Thomas jolted in his seat.
The commanding regional logistics manager vanished, replaced by a desperate, aging man witnessing the collapse of his legacy. He looked at the abandoned engagement ring, then looked directly at me. His face morphed into a mask of frantic negotiation. The hostility he projected just minutes ago evaporated completely. He leaned across the table, extending his hands in a pleading gesture.
Audrey, he began, his tone dropping an octave to convey sudden manufactured warmth. Let us take a breath. Emotions are running incredibly high right now. People make mistakes when they are stressed. Your brother made a terrible error in judgment, but we can fix this. I watched my father attempt to salvage a sunken ship. He was pivoting with breathtaking speed, transitioning from a bully to a beggar without missing a beat. We are blood, Thomas pleaded. Family works through these complications. We can arrange a payment plan for whatever damages occurred. Just reinstate the booking. You own the property. You have the ultimate authority to bypass the system and put his name back on the September calendar. Do not let his relationship end over a foolish financial dispute. We will make it right. I promise you we will work this out as a family. Patricia nodded frantically beside him. She lost her ability to form coherent sentences. She simply stared at me with wide, begging eyes. The woman who prized suburban prestige above all else was currently pleading with the daughter she routinely disrespected to restore her social standing. They wanted me to erase the crime. They expected me to leverage my corporate power to shield their golden boy from the consequences he explicitly earned. They believed the magic word family would act as a universal eraser for fraud. I slowly brought my hands together. I grasped the cover of the black binder. I folded the heavy leather shut. The sharp snap of the metal rings locking into place echoed with absolute finality. I did not raise my voice. I did not express any anger. I looked directly into my father's pleading eyes and delivered the verdict. The booking is permanently canceled, I stated. My resort does not host clients who attempt to defraud the enterprise, regardless of their last name. Our corporate policy is inflexible. There is no grace period for intentional theft. You cannot negotiate a new contract with a company you just tried to rob. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal blazer. The physical act of rising forced my parents to look up at me. The hierarchy in the room officially inverted. They were sitting in the wreckage of their own greed, gazing upward at the authority they could no longer manipulate. I glanced toward the far end of the boardroom. Aunt Helen had already retrieved her smartphone from her pocket. She held the device beneath the edge of the wood, her thumbs flying across the digital keyboard with practiced speed. She was not waiting for the meeting to formally conclude. The family matriarch was actively disseminating the truth to every aunt, uncle, and cousin in her extensive network. I saw my mother follow my gaze. Patricia realized what Helen was doing. A fresh wave of horror washed over my mother's face. She understood that by the time she reached her vehicle in the parking garage, the entire extended family would possess the exact details of Declan's attempted extortion. The false narrative Patricia planted on social media earlier that afternoon was officially dead, replaced by documented facts. My parents realized they possessed zero leverage. The financial well they relied upon was capped and sealed permanently. They could not threaten me, they could not guilt me, and they could no longer lie about me. I gathered my binder from the walnut surface. I did not offer a farewell. I did not demand an apology, because apologies extracted under pressure hold zero value. I simply turned and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked steadily against the polished concrete floor. Each step felt incredibly light. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped into the brightly lit corridor of the co-working space. I did not feel the lingering sting of betrayal. I did not feel the hot flush of rage. The only sensation flooding my chest was an overwhelming, profound sense of liberation. For 33 years, I carried the heavy burden of their lazy entitlement. I absorbed their passive-aggressive insults. I funded their delusions to keep the peace. I operated as the designated shock absorber for every failure my brother produced. That burden was finally lifted. The invisible chains forged by familial obligation snapped the moment they tried to steal from my business. I navigated my way to the elevators, pressing the call button. The metal doors slid open, offering a quiet sanctuary. As the cab descended toward the street level, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel panels. The woman staring back was unburdened. She was a self-made architect who successfully protected her fortress.
My parents and my brother remained trapped in that rented glass box. They were left to stare at a discarded diamond ring and a stack of printed server logs. They had to figure out how to explain their ruin to a family tree that already knew the objective truth. I stepped out of the building and into the crisp Denver afternoon. The sun felt warm against my face. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine and absolute freedom. I unlocked my vehicle, placing the evidence on the passenger seat. The conflict was over, and I was finally driving home. 6 months have passed since I walked out of that glass boardroom in downtown Denver. I am currently standing on the wraparound cedar deck of the Alpine Crest Lodge. The morning sun climbs over the Continental Divide, casting long shadows across the valley floor. The air up here is thin and pure, carrying the sharp scent of pine needles in early frost. I rest my hands on the wooden railing. The timber feels solid and enduring beneath my palms. The stark contrast between the profound quiet of this mountain sanctuary and the chaotic greed of my relatives provides a daily reminder of exactly what I fought to protect. I built a life rooted in stability, and I refused to let their lazy entitlement tear it down. The immediate fallout of that meeting was swift and permanent. Madison did not return to the apartment she shared with my brother. She ordered a moving company to collect her belongings the very next afternoon while he was out running errands. The engagement ring remained exactly where she threw it, on the reclaimed walnut table. Building management eventually placed the jewelry in a lost and found bin. Declan never returned to retrieve it. His grand illusion of becoming a wealthy technology founder evaporated the moment he was exposed as a common grifter. Without my financial backing to subsidize his extravagant habits, his wages from the boutique ski shop could not cover his rent. He faced a harsh reality check. He was forced to pack his bags and move back into my parents' basement. His imaginary luxury camping application was permanently abandoned. He traded his future for a lazy cash grab and ended up with nothing but a canceled reservation and a ruined reputation. Thomas and Patricia attempted to launch a desperate damage control campaign. They tried to spin a false narrative, hoping to portray me as a ruthless corporate executive who bullied her fragile brother over a simple administrative error. They wanted to cast themselves as the grieving parents trying to hold a fractured family together, but they severely underestimated the ruthless efficiency of Aunt Helen. By the time my parents drove home from the co-working space, the family matriarch had already contacted every major branch of our family tree. Helen did not merely share rumors or vague suspicions. She recounted the exact details of the certified server logs, the forged correspondence, and my corporate ownership registration. She provided an eyewitness account of Declan committing fraud and my parents defending his theft. She described the undeniable proof resting on the conference table. The resulting social isolation was total. My parents rely heavily on the respect of their peers and extended relatives. Their entire identity is wrapped up in projecting an image of suburban perfection. Now they walk into holiday gatherings and country club dinners carrying the inescapable stigma of enabling a thief. Their cousins politely excuse themselves when Thomas approaches the buffet line. Their lifelong friends offer tight, uncomfortable smiles before swiftly changing the subject. The prestige my mother spent decades curating shattered beyond repair. They are trapped in a prison of their own making, isolated by the very community they tried to manipulate. They chose to protect a lie, and the truth left them entirely alone. I established strict, unbreakable boundaries the morning after the confrontation. The era of functioning as the family shock absorber ended permanently. I blocked their phone numbers on my personal device. I instructed my corporate security team to flag and reject any correspondence originating from their addresses. I hired a specialized family estate attorney to serve as my exclusive proxy. If my parents require communication regarding medical directives, inheritance matters, or holiday logistics, they must pay a retainer fee and submit a formal written request through my legal counsel. I removed their ability to access my time, my energy, and my capital. The emotional liberation is profound. I wake up each morning without dreading a sudden demand for funds. I no longer carry the heavy, suffocating burden of their manufactured crises. For 33 years, I believed I owed them my success simply because we shared the same blood. I finally understand that biology does not obligate you to fund someone else's dysfunction. You can love your family from a distance, or you can cut ties with them entirely without carrying an ounce of guilt. The Centennial State rewards rugged individualism. The mountains do not care about your excuses or your sense of entitlement. They demand respect, preparation, and relentless hard work. I built Alpine Eco Resorts on that exact philosophy. True success is constructed on a solid foundation of late nights, calculated risks, and unwavering integrity. You cannot build a lasting empire by stealing resources from the people who care about you. My brother thought he could take a shortcut to the summit, but he lacked the endurance to climb the trail. He slipped on his own deceit and tumbled right back to the bottom. My company continues to thrive, untainted by the toxic demands of my past. We broke ground on the Aspen Wellness Center last month. We are expanding our portfolio into sustainable luxury cabins near Telluride. I work alongside talented, dedicated professionals who respect the vision we are building together. I employ a staff that values honesty over shortcuts. My ledger is clean. My conscience is clear. Every brick laid and every timber raised is a testament to the fact that I earned my place in this world. Later this evening, I will sit by the immense stone fireplace in the main lobby of the lodge. The River Rock hearth radiates a deep, comforting heat. I will watch the flames crackle against the dry logs, enjoying the quiet peace of a life I built and protected with my own two hands. I will drink a glass of dark red wine and listen to the wind howling through the canyon, knowing my fortress is secure. I refuse to let their lazy greed dismantle my sanctuary. I drew a line in the sand and allowed them to cross it at their own peril. They gambled their relationship with me for a quick payday, and they lost the only reliable asset they ever had. If you found out your family was trying to steal from you to fund their illusion, would you write the check? Or would you let them cancel their own dream? I want to hear your perspective. Share your stories in the comments below, because nobody should have to carry the weight of a toxic family alone. If my journey resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, Morning Revenge, so you never miss another story of quiet justice. Your support helps bring these truths into the light. Thank you for listening, and always remember to protect your peace. The majestic, jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies do not negotiate with the wind. They do not lower themselves to accommodate the freezing rain, nor do they apologize for the harshness of the winter snow. They simply stand, enduring the elements through a foundation forged deep within the unrelenting earth. There is a profound parallel between these ancient immovable stones and the traditional American ideals of self-reliance, honest labor, and personal accountability. Yet as we reflect on Audrey's journey, a story of a sister who dismantled her family's toxic entitlement with a single corporate binder, we are forced to examine a devastating erosion of those very values within the modern American home. This is not merely a tale of a spoiled brother and a triumphant executive. It is a tragic autopsy of failed parenting and a stark warning about the consequences of shielding our children from reality. To parents across America, Thomas and Patricia serve as a chilling mirror. In their desperate, misguided bid to give their son the world, they robbed him of the very tools he needed to survive in it. In modern society, we often confuse enablement with love. We convince ourselves that shielding our children from the consequences of their actions is a supreme act of parental devotion. But when we constantly absorb the impact of their failures, when we demand that our responsible, hardworking children subsidize the reckless ones to maintain an illusion of harmony, we are not building a family. We are constructing a parasite. Traditional family education in American culture has long been rooted in the concepts of fairness, honesty, and emotional awareness. It is about teaching a child that their actions carry weight, that their word is their bond, and that true pride is derived solely from what you build with your own two hands. Thomas and Patricia ignored this fundamental duty. They worshipped the illusion of prestige over the quiet dignity of character. In doing so, they created a man-child who believed that fabricating a legal document was a more reasonable path than earning an honest paycheck. The message here is stark and urgent. True parental love requires the emotional fortitude to let your children fall. It requires the profound wisdom to say no. If you raise a child to believe the world owes them a luxury mountain venue, they will eventually try to steal the deed to the property. Parents must cultivate honesty and fairness at the dinner table, setting rigid boundaries long before their children ever step out into the real world. From Audrey's quiet, unshakable posture, a critical message emerges for today's young people. Society often teaches us that blood is an inescapable contract, implying that our moral worth is somehow defined by our utility to our family members. Audrey's story shatters this toxic illusion. Her message to the youth is one of radical self-respect. Your worth is not determined by how much of your soul you are willing to set on fire to keep someone else warm. True independence is forged in the crucible of personal accountability. The greatest inheritance you will ever receive is not a trust fund, a saved wedding date, or a piece of prime real estate. The greatest inheritance is the character you build when nobody is looking. You have the right to construct a fortress around your peace, and you have every right to demand that those who enter your life bring their own bricks rather than stealing yours. When we broaden our lens and observe this family dynamic through the eyes of a spiritual practitioner, the narrative transcends a mere familial financial dispute. It becomes a profound commentary on the state of the modern soul. American society today is plagued by an epidemic of external validation. We seek rapid shortcuts to happiness, confusing material aesthetics like a lavish, exclusive wedding with genuine spiritual fulfillment. From a standpoint of self-cultivation, Declan's blinding greed and his parents' desperate complicity represent a deep spiritual sickness. They are entirely disconnected from their inner moral compass, wandering blindly in a vast desert of ego superficiality and status. The spiritual practitioner understands that a good life is not acquired, it is cultivated over time. It requires the rigorous, often painful discipline of pulling the insidious weeds of entitlement from our own hearts. It demands resilience. When we practice true self-cultivation, we align our actions with deep-seated morality. We stop looking for someone else to pay our emotional and financial debts, and we begin the sacred work of balancing our own karmic ledgers. American parents must recognize that the ultimate goal of raising a child is not to guarantee their lifelong comfort, but to awaken their wisdom. A resilient spirit is built only by facing the harsh consequences of one's actions. When we deny our children their struggles, we actively deny them their spiritual growth. We leave them hollow, forever chasing external prizes because they possess no internal sanctuary. Audrey found her sanctuary not just in the reclaimed timber and glass of her eco-resort, but in the unshakable bedrock of her own integrity. She did not need to shout, because the truth possesses its own resonant frequency. If this reflection resonates with the silent battles you are fighting in your own life, if you are currently navigating the heavy, exhausting burden of familial expectations, I encourage you to follow the channel Morning Revenge. We will continue to explore the profound intersections of justice, truth, and the quiet courage it takes to reclaim your life. Conventional wisdom has spent generations preaching a singular, absolute doctrine: family is everything. We are told that blood is thicker than water, that unconditional forgiveness is a mandatory family tax, and that no matter how deep the wound, you must always leave the door unlocked for your own flesh and blood. But perhaps that is the greatest lie we have ever been sold. Sometimes the most profound act of love you can offer a toxic family is your permanent absence. Sometimes the only way to save a family is to let it break entirely. We are conditioned to believe that keeping the family unit intact is the ultimate moral victory, even if the foundation is rotting beneath our feet and poisoning the groundwater. But look closely at the empty conference room, at the discarded diamond ring, and at the parents sitting in the quiet, inescapable devastation of their own making. The destruction of their illusion was not a tragedy. It was a necessary amputation. As you look at the structure of your own life, ask yourself, are you holding on to toxic bonds simply because they share your last name? Or are you brave enough to let the illusion burn so you can finally see the truth in the ashes?